Yo, what is up everyone, back here with another video. In today's video, we are going to be doing a tier list on the Tera raid Pokemon that you should be bringing to Tera raids, and which ones I think should actually be taking priority. So you'll notice that there are a lot of Pokemon that are already in the don't use category. That is quite literally just to save us time. Obviously these are focused more so on 5-star and 6-star raids. So these are going to be focused on kind of just optimizing your experience so that you can beat these raids as easily as possible, right? So if you see these Pokemon here, some of them might be viable in early game, but this tier list isn't really focused on that. This is focused on the 5, 6 stars, and eventually 7-star raids. So without further ado, let's get right into it. So basically, you'll see the first Pokemon here is Umbreon. So I've broken it up into 5 different categories. Don't use, only use if no better options, good in specific raids, very viable, best viability. So in raids, it's really important to be able to get damage output and kind of assist your team. Sometimes if your like support member is assisting enough in terms of mitigating damage or spreading enough status, it can be good. The only thing is within 5 and 6-star raids, they enter a phase where you eventually cannot status, right? So if your Pokemon's not really doing damage beyond there, it's not super great. However, obviously there are going to be some people who are transitioning into these 5-star raids from, early game or mid game, and they're gonna, or like rather just like, from ending their run, and they're still going to be collecting Pokemon to try and be good in these raids. So, one of the first Pokemon I wanted to put in the only use if no better options here is Umbreon. So Umbreon at least has a couple different decent options, I should say. Sorry if I messed up my wording a little bit. Pretty much it gets access to Thunder Wave, which you can utilize to kind of paralyze the opposing Tera raid Pokemon and slow it down. You can utilize Wish to kind of keep yourself alive, or Moonlight. Go for foul plays and go for snarls. This can help your teammates actually just get good damage off versus the opponent, and you could also just stall the opponent, make it harder for the Pokemon to actually attack your teammates, and that's just a really nice tool. Next up, Wo-Chien. So I mentioned in the previous video that having access to these sub legends are really good for raids, but this is something that actually a comment had talked about on one of my previous videos, about how his teammates would always bring the worst possible Ruination legend, because it would always be worst for the situation and make it harder for him because he was either taking more damage or not doing enough damage, etc. So the reason why I'm putting this in good in specific raids is because you're not always going to want to take these. These are going to be good on compositions that are well thought out with your teammates, friends. These are ones that you should be cautious about using in raids in general when you're not working with other people, right? Because it's harder to coordinate. Some people might overlap things that are not necessarily good for the Ruination. Same thing with Wo-Chien. Wo-Chien does end up lowering attack, but you have to be careful with it and make sure that you're utilizing it properly. Okay, Abomasnow. So Abomasnow goes into the only use if no better. Actually, honestly, it's so bad that I'm probably gonna put in no use. These are 5-star rates. These are pretty hard. Amoonguss is a weird one. I was really debating between going down into only use if no better options, or if it should go down in no use. Redirection obviously isn't useful in this at all, and pretty much Amoonguss is outclassed in these raids by Brute Bonnet because Brute Bonnet can actually do damage. So for this reason, it's in don't use. I just wanted to cover some of the mons that people might be like, wait, what? Why is that down there? So next up is Annihilate. Annihilate is also down in the only use if no better options. This is really just a Pokemon that is outclassed by some of the higher tier options that you're going to have for Tera raids. And I'm going to get to that, but it is a Defiant Mon, so you can capitalize against specific Intimidate Pokemon that you might run into in dens. So you can take advantage of Annihilate to boost against them, but overall I'd say that you're probably going to be at more of a disadvantage if you're taking something like Annihilate. So next up is going to be Arcanine. So Arcanine is going to go in somewhere between the good in specific raids and only use if no better options. So basically it is an Intimidator, which is really nice. I'll probably put it in good in specific raids. And you can go for Will-O-Wisp, which is really nice. Along with Intimidate, you're reducing their damage. And this is a super useful tool. It also gets access to Morning Sun, which can help with its sustain, which is obviously going to prevent the opposing AI from just taking you out and burning away at your clock. And as well, too, you get access to powerful moves like Flare Blitz, Close Combat, a couple of other coverage moves. So you can make Arcanine, fairly usable in certain raids. The only thing is that obviously, compared to some of the other Pokemon we're going to be talking about, the stats aren't particularly, insane. But the Intimidate, combined with the utility that you get out of it with Snarl, Will-O-Wisp, all that stuff is really nice. Armorage kind of goes in the same category, although I would probably lower it down to like only use if there's no better options. So you might be like, okay, but like why Armorage like down and only use if no better options? Pretty much it's just outclassed by Ceruledge in this what's it called, in raid dens. And pretty much the reason why is because the meta is kind of getting health back with certain attacks, or like, you know, boosting yourself and then doing damage. And Armorage is just kind of more of that Pokemon that like, yeah, I can go for a Will-O-Wisp, but then like what are you really doing after that? You can attack, right, which is sometimes what you need to do, but it doesn't necessarily like open it up to many different roles it can perform on like a raid composition, right? So Azumarill is an interesting one. You can Belly Drum, which already gives it like a specific niche. Obviously, for this Pokemon, it might be harder to get up a Belly Drum than with others. So if for that reason, it's going to be good in specific raids. The typing's also really nice. It can wall certain things. You can use that to take advantage of certain Pokemon that you'd encounter in Tera raids. Baxcalibur is going to go in the only use if no better options. It overall has a high base stat total, so you can leverage it into types that you have an advantage versus, but overall the Pokemon is pretty flawed, so you have to be careful about how you're using it in these raids. But let's say you just finished a playthrough, you can probably do a 5-star raid and get away with using something like this. All right, Gastrodon. So Gastrodons are going to go in the good in specific raids. So you will very specifically only really want to use these when you are in situations where they cannot touch you with anything, you know, besides a water type move. And you can just take advantage of that. Just sit there with Gastrodon and kind of get Storm Drain boosts and just attack. Besides that, Gastrodon really has limited viability. It's like on the very bottom of this list. It's going to be the same actually with another Pokemon I'm going to talk about with a similar kit. But the two Gastrodons aren't particularly known for doing damage, but in certain like Tera raids where you can Storm Drain boost, it is really nice to just wall them. So Braviary is going to go into good in specific raids, but it's like kind of near. I'd actually probably put it like right where Primeape is. Same thing, it can defy and boost off of Intimidate raids, but you know, you need to be cautious with it, and also it's not like the most optimal in terms of utilizing it. Breloom's also going to go in the only use if no better options. Realistically, there are just better Pokemon that you can take advantage of. And the reasoning for that really is just that you have like Brute Bonnet, you know, and like honestly, Brute Bonnet outclasses both of these. Obviously, if you're early game, then or like you're early in terms of like getting the post game stuff, then you would want to use something like Breloom because that makes a little bit more sense for your team. Bronzong, again, is really an only use if, like, no better options. You could theoretically argue it could fit in good in specific raids because you can Iron Defense Body Press, but the Tera raids do tend to, like, kind of clear your status boost. You can set Trick Room as well, which is a cute niche, but I think at best that nails it at, like, the top of only use if no better options. Realistically, in these Tera raids, you want something that's proactive, and maybe if something totally walls like a Tera Pokemon and can eventually boost and do something, then you can kind of take advantage of it. But besides that, usually you want to keep it pretty straightforward. So Brute Bonnet's another example of only good in specific scenarios. So where you'll most see it probably is on the Photosynthesis composition. So this is really stuff taking advantage of Koraidon's ability, Aralkium Pulse, I think it's called. And pretty much what it does is it sets Sun and it boosts like the strongest stat of the other, you know, Paradox Pokemon associated with the legendary. That being said, Brute Bonnet is probably one of the worst ones of the bunch, at least for Tera raids, because its damage output is still severely lacking in comparison to, you know, the other legends as well. That being said, though, you do get access to Spore, which is a really nice tool because you can use that to disrupt early and let people set up. You can also take advantage of Crunch, Sucker Punch, you know, Seed Bomb. You have some options there, right? So it's not completely futile. I think it also has Synthesis, which allows you to have some sustain. So it is good in certain situations, right? Like, it's not always bad. It's just more so you have to be, like, aware when you're using it and understand that, like, it's not, like, exactly a top tier option. Ceruledge also goes up into the good in specific scenarios. It does have Flash Fire, so you can kind of use that to just wall a fire type Tera raid, and just take advantage of that. Also in front of like certain Pokemon, like Fire Ghost coverage is really nice. The only thing you have to keep in mind is it is a little bit frail, so you know you can't exactly just like spam it in front of everything. That being said, though, you know, you do get access to Will-O-Wisp as well, so it does have some nice tools, and it does have recovery. That's why it's actually placed above Armorage. It's I forgot the name of its signature move, but basically it's like a blade move. It's fire type, and it gets health back when it attacks. So it's It's pretty nice. It's like physical Giga Drain, basically, but maybe a little bit stronger. Chin Pao, same thing as Wo Chien. Like, it's good in specific raids for reducing stats of the opposing raid Pokemon if you're taking advantage of it. But you have to make sure that it doesn't come at the cost of your own Pokemon and making sure you're using it in the right situation. Most of the Ruination Quartet's going to end up... Actually, all the Ruination Quartet's probably going to end up here, except for, like, maybe one. But yeah. All right, speaking of which, Chi-Yu also goes into the good and specific raids. So this is one that lowers special defense, so you can pretty much utilize it to, you know, pair with, like, let's say you have 3 special attackers, right? And the opposing opponent's a physical attacker, a Tera raid Pokemon's a physical attacker. You can stack this with like 3 special attackers that you know are just gonna be able to do a bunch of damage and just win the raid really quickly because you can kind of cheese it that way. And realistically, it does get access to Nasty Plot as well, which gives it the ability to boost. So it has some cute options, but nothing that would take it into like the high tiers of viability. Clodsire as well is going to go into the good and specific raids. It has Water Absorb, and it has, you know, obviously a Poison and Ground typing. So that's actually a really unique defensive like typing that you can take advantage of combined with the ability. And you can kind of use that to just cheese some raids. And wall them. Same with actually Dash Bun. So pretty much with this Pokemon, it's immune to fire type moves, so you can use that to cheese certain raids as well. I think you can see a trend here with the good and specific raids. It's literally just a case by case basis, but these aren't exactly Pokemon I got my way to focus on. Besides, like, you know, the the Ruination Quartet. I'm gonna call them the Ruination Quartet. That's the easiest way to refer to them. Dragalge goes into the only use if no better options. I mean, it's solid poison coverage. It has adaptability, so you're getting some damage off with it. But that being said, like, I would say you probably don't want to really be using that in the late game versus most things. Dragapult's kind of a weird one. I was originally considering putting it in good and specific raids, but it kind of strikes me as a Pokemon that's not really able to do too much damage. You can go for a Wisp, which is really nice with it, but it kind of lacks the sustain or like the kit to take advantage of what it wants to with its set. So I think that it kind of puts it in the only use if no better options category. All right, so Dragonite. Dragonite's a really interesting one. It probably is going to end up in the only use if no better options category. I was originally considering putting it in good and specific raids, but the main issue that it has is just like, even though it's really good coverage, like, it does get outperformed by a lot of other like common Pokemon that just can do better than it, right? So realistically, like, a lot of the Pokemon that are like shown here are only like good if you don't have the legendaries, but we're going under the assumption it's 5-6-star raids, like you have them. And then if you don't, that's why we have the only use if no better options category, right? So kind of fits. So the Dunsparce is in the only use if no better options category. The only reason why is because it gets access to a bunch of stat dropping moves, which you can kind of pair with a bunch of these, you know, a bunch of the compositions like early on. So you have Metal Sound, you have Screech, you have a couple different things you can pull off, Thunder Wave, so you can take advantage of that. Fluttermane goes in the good and specific raids category. Now you might be like, whoa, like, I felt like this would be better. You have to remember that raids are about long-term sustainability. So even though Fluttermane has a lot of damage output, they have more HP to take as many hits as they want. And if you're just going to drop to a like physical attack, for example, you're not going to bring it there, right? So realistically, like, Fluttermane is going to be good in situations where maybe you can take it to wall a special threat and get a bunch of damage, but you're not always going to be utilizing it because, you know, it's limited in what it can do in the scope of like Tera raids. All right, Gallade. This is again just a only use if no better options. It does have sharpness. It does have Swords Dance. You can boost, and you can use that to take out the earlier raids. And maybe you can cheese some raids with it, but you have to be extremely cautious with any of these in the only use if no better options. You know, it gets a Swords Dance. It gets sharpness. You can go for Sacred Swords. You can go for a bunch of stuff, which is nice. So Garchomp goes into the good and specific raids. I would say it's pretty close to being in the only use if no better options, but Garchomp is obviously a substantially better Pokemon in terms of stats, so it automatically makes it like a better Pokemon that you can utilize, right? Overall, Garchomp's just a really strong Pokemon, so you can kind of take advantage of his base stats and just leverage that. It gets access to Swords Dance, Earthquake, a bunch of stuff, and you can just take advantage of it enough where like it can be utilized well. Gardevoir again goes into the only use if no better options. You can kind of cheese some raids with Trace. You can also potentially, you know, do Calm Mind boosting, pairing it with like some other Pokemon. But realistically, It is limited in the scope of what it can do. It does have access to Moonblast and some coverage, which is nice, but not necessarily enough to prevent it from being like right on the border. So Garganacl is a really interesting one. I do want to say it is good in specific raids. It does get access to this ability called Purifying Salt, and you can Iron Defense Body Press with it, along with Salt Cure, which does chip Tera Raid Pokemon. That being said, though, besides that, I'd probably put it in only use if no better options, actually, but like it's pretty close to being in good in specific raids. You get enough options with it where it's like a pretty decent enough raid mon where you can maybe get by with it. But it's not, I'm not offering anything particularly special in terms of like, you know, its damage. It's a little bit passive too. I mean, it has Recover for Sustain, which is nice. And it has Iron Defense. It has, you know, Salt Cure, which you can use to chip the opponent, which is nice. But, you know, I still don't think it's necessarily better than some of these other options. Because the thing is, and you might see like Clodsire and be like, okay, but this thing's way better because it can Iron Defense Body Press. Stat-wise, move-wise, it's probably better. But Clodsire can literally just sport an immunity to something and just cheese it. So that's the difference there, right? Gengar. So Gengar goes into it's somewhere between the only use if no better option and don't use category. For me personally, I'd probably lean towards more don't use, but it can maybe squeeze into the only use if no better options. The main issue it has is like it's super frail, like some of the other Pokemon we were talking about. You'd have to utilize Will-O-Wisp on this thing to give you some sort of sustain, maybe like Black Sludge, and a little bit of bulk to try and keep stuff alive. And obviously, like realistically, you want to start biasing towards the Pokemon that are going to be good regardless of whether you EV them or not, and then like are just incredibly good when you EV them, right? Okay, Gholdengo. So Gholdengo goes into the only use if no better options category. Now this may sound crazy because of how hard it is to get, but realistically, like it's a really specific actually, you know what? I put it in the good and specific raids because there are going to be some Pokemon that can't touch it, but realistically, it is a little bit limited in what it can do. It does have access to a really strong 120 base power steel move, which you can pair with Terrestrialization, Nasty Plot, Shadow Ball, and then you have like the last free slot to do whatever you want with it. But obviously, in terms of its offense, it is outclassed by a couple of certain Pokemon, and it is a bit linear in what it does, so it's not really going to be a super all-around viable option, right? Okay, so Goodra. Goodra can like fit into the only use if no better options category just because it has such big special bulk and you can kind of leverage it into specific raids, but it's kind of cutting it close. All right, Great Tusk. So Great Tusk goes into the good and specific raids. Realistically, with Great Tusk, the main issue that it has is it pretty much actually, you know what? It probably deserves a bit better. I would say any of the Paradox Pokemon, save like a few, at least like deserve like this higher area of like viability, right? So it's actually really interesting because between Koraidon and Miraidon is the better of the two in terms of like general use in Tera raids. But the funny thing is, like, so in VGC or competitive, which is the competitive like Pokemon format, the Sunmons are actually way better, Sun Paradox Pokemon, but in raids, it's actually usually the other Paradox Pokemon, the future ones that are better. So that's actually really interesting. But anyways, you know, the main problem with Great Tusk is that it just kind of gets held back by sharing the same type as Koraidon, which you're realistically going to want to use to set the weather. So it's tricky, right? You have a bit of redundancy, but obviously if you don't care about the type redundancy and it's good into specific raids, you're going to utilize it. Grimmsnarl, again, is another Pokemon that's going to be good in the specific raids. Like, sometimes it's kid of, like, Thunder Wave, setting screens. Like, that's kind of cute and allows it to stall a little bit. But realistically, you're going to want something more proactive. So this barely, like, kind of gets in the good and specific raids. It does have Prankster. It does have certain moves it can pull off that can be really annoying for an opposing Tera Raid mon. But it's not really going to do too much. Next up is Gyarados. So Gyarados actually goes into the very viable tier. I think it's the best Intimidator for Tera Raids. Its unique typing combined with its access to Thunder Wave is just incredibly strong. Thunder Wave really just punishes them and doesn't let them use their turns efficiently. And that's actually just a really nice option that you get access to with Gyarados, right? So I think realistically, like, that is a really cool option. And it can be utilized on a lot of different comps. So you can take advantage of that Pokemon more than you would with others. Hariyama is going to go into the only use if no better options. You can use this as kind of like a discount Iron Hands. Iron Hands is objectively better if you're going to be doing Tera Raids and you have like a stacked up team. But this can also run Belly Drum and Drain Punch, if I remember correctly. I'm actually going to double check on that. That's a very common set on Iron Hands that it takes advantage of. It does get Drain Punch. So you can basically run like discount Iron Hands with Drain Punch and Belly Drum. But realistically, right, you probably want to be going with, you know, a better, more safer option. So I would say Iron Hands is just a better option if you have access to it. If you have Scarlet, then maybe this is justifiable, but even then, maybe you should be using Koraidon anyways. So yeah, it's very much just like a, if you are early game, you don't have options yet. But the Belly Drum Citrus Berry set with Drain Punch and then some other coverage move would be like Phenomenal and Hariyama, if you're really like struggling to find something. So it's like not a bad like discount pick basically. Hippowdon's going to go into the only use if no better options. It just has a lot of bulk. It has slack off. You can use it to wall like certain electric types, fire types. But, you know, realistically beyond that, it's not really going to be doing too much. Hydreigon. So Hydreigon's an interesting one. I was kind of back and forth on it. Originally, I'd been using it a lot. I was like, oh, this thing's pretty cool. But I feel like it goes down into the only use if no better options. That breaks my heart, by the way. I love Hydreigon. No, actually, you know what? It goes into the good and specific raids category, but I'm going to put it like very towards the bottom. Is Levitate, so it sports an immunity to ground, which you can use to cheese like certain stuff combined with its typing of Dark and Dragon. But you have to be very cautious with this. It does get access to a wide move pool, so you get a bunch of coverage like Earth Power, Flamethrower, Dark Pulse, Draco Meteor, Dragon Pulse. So you can, and Nasty Plot 2 for setup. You have Taunt. So there's a bunch of stuff it can do that you can take advantage of. Overall, I would say that like it's a good like option if you're still like kind of building up to the really, really good Pokemon. But overall, like it's still something, right? Like it's a decent enough option. Iron Bundle. So Iron Bundle for me, I know I was talking about how I thought the Future Paradox ones were pretty good. It's one of the ones that I think aren't very good in raids, and that's mostly just because it's frail and like it doesn't give you a lot of benefit. But it would be good in specific raids because you can just bring it to matchups where you know it's going to be strong, or bring it to Tera raids where you know it's going to be strong. So it's less widely useful, but it's still really good when it does perform because it has access to Freeze Dry, has access to, you know, has access to a lot of good options there. All right, so we have Iron Hands. So Iron Hands either is going to go into best viability or very viable. For me, it goes into best viability, and it's mostly because of its main set that it utilizes in raids. And that set is going to be the Belly Drum. It's Drain Punch, Thunder Punch, Belly Drum, and then you have a Citrus Berry. And you have Quark Drive activated because this should always be paired. This basically always needs to be paired with Miraidon. And your last coverage move is kind of dependent on what you want to cover. You can really utilize it for anything. I've mostly seen Earthquake because Earthquake is just nice for breaking like opposing electric types. If you bring this in the wall opposing electric type, or just go for a Belly Drum, get the boost, go for a Drain Punch or Earthquake, whatever you want. Technically Ice Punch as well, but you shouldn't really be bringing this into ground types. Like, I'm going to talk about this in my next video where I talk about Tera Raid compositions. Or like one of my next videos where I talk about Tera Raid compositions, but you shouldn't really be bringing like certain compositions into matchups that you know are bad. You should be brute forcing it, right? Like the objective is to have a bunch of flexibility to pick between different stuff. But that's why also too, in this list, I'm kind of pointing out the ones that I think have the best viability because they're going to be good in most situations. So you're going to have to rely on less other Pokemon on your team for that. Okay, so Iron Jugulus. So Iron Jugulus is a really interesting one. I think it goes down kind of near the Hydreigon area. It does get the ability to boost, which is kind of cute, but besides that, it literally offers nothing else. It's just the same thing as Hydreigon, pretty much. The only actually drawback is it does lose its resistance when it terrestrializes, but having access to Flying type does give you a niche versus like the certain grass Terra types you might play versus, right? So you get better options there. All right, so Iron Moth goes into the very viable category, and this is pretty much like Iron Moth with the fire poison coverage can do a bunch of damage. Now, I do want to clarify. Actually, honestly, it might even go down a little bit, but it's like top of good in specific raids. So Iron Moth, I've mentioned this in my previous videos where I talk about its competitive viability in doubles. It doesn't hold it back here because you can go for spread moves, and there's literally zero punishment for it. So you can click Sludge Wave, you can click like any kind of move you want that has the strongest base power here. There's no drawback. You also get access to Acid Spray, which is a really busted support move. It does damage, and you can also lower the special defense for your partners that are attacking if you have a special attacking composition. You boost next to Miraidon, which is literally one of the best Raidmons, or is the best Raidmon, right? And you also do get the ability to Will-O-Wisp, right? So it gives you a bunch of different options to kind of make these raids easier. The only thing that holds it back is its lack of defenses, but you can kind of take advantage of that anyways once you're able to terrestrialize and just go for a bunch of, damage. So Iron Thorns goes down into the good and specific raids category. It has a really unique typing, but it's kind of like that Delibird Iron Jugulus situation where like they're just a little bit weaker than the rest. So like you shouldn't really be prioritizing them over like the top options. But if you're like bored and you're like, okay, like now I have like a lot of these top tier options, like I can afford to like flesh it out, mess around with compositions, you can get yourself an Iron Thorns for raiding. I would say the most it can really do is like rock coverage, electric coverage. It does get access to Dragonite, so you could potentially boost. It does get access to Taunt, if I remember correctly. Let's actually check that real quick. Thorns. And then we'll have Thunder Punch. It does get access to Thunder Wave too. Thunder Wave is an incredibly useful option. And it does get access to Rock Slide, so you could potentially like Paraflinch stuff as well, which is kind of cute. And then you get like an extra coverage move as well on top of that, if you'd prefer. So that's an option too. And yeah, realistically, I'd say Iron Thorns, like, it can do its job, right? It's better than, like, it only use if, like, no better options. So, Iron Tread's kind of the same thing. I think realistically, it's just kind of outclassed by, like, some of the other Pokemon at the top level. Now, don't get me wrong, like, these Pokemon are not by any means bad. They're just, like, less good, basically. Like, you can argue that they're the top, like they're in the very viable or best viability basically, but you can like understand that they're good in specific raids and you can utilize them in like certain situations that play to their strengths. Iron Valiant. So Iron Valiant's going to go into the very viable for me. I think it's one of the better partners with Miraidon with the Quark engine. You can run it special or you can run it physical, which gives it a lot of versatility in raids because you can kind of customize it to where you're actually trying to really damage the raid. You can even have two of them, one for special offense and then one for, attack. And I've seen this thing do a lot of damage. Swords Dance set obviously is pretty potent, but the spec set with Quark Drive is pretty nuts. It can do a bunch of damage immediately, and into the right mon, it can be like put on a lot of pressure. Kingambit. So Kingambit's going to go into the good and specific raids. So Kingambit's really like the way you use it is pretty much like I know that this Pokemon doesn't have the coverage to touch what's it called, Dark and Steel combination. So basically that means them not having fighting moves, right? That means them not having great options to hit you. So I can sit here and I can either boost off of their Intimidate and beat them because they don't have anything to hit me, or what I can do is I can Swords Dance in front of you. You can't hit me, and I will beat you just by out damaging you eventually, right? So either of those are kind of the way Kingambit plays. I would say that Kingambit in general like does have a lot of sizable bulk, so you can leverage that in raids where like that they don't have like a strong ways to touch you, especially if their best ways to touch you are on the physical end. They don't really have like the best coverage to do so. You can kind of leverage Kingambit there and Swords Dance boost and try and end the raid a bit faster. Crocodile is going to go into the only use if no better options. It's an Intimidator, so obviously Intimidate gives you an option to utilize it, but it's not a top tier Intimidator by any means. You probably want something like an Arcanine or a Gyarados. Toxicroak, so this one goes into the only use if no better options, but technically you could use it to cheese in specific raids because like if they don't have anything to touch you with good coverage, then you could technically leverage that, but it's so specific in like what it would wall that like it goes into the only use if no better options, right? It does get Taunt, it does get Sword Dance. Again, another Intimidator. This is going to go into the only use if no better options. These are kind of just like discount options of like better things in the tiers above pretty much. And you should only really be using them if like you don't have access to the top things yet or you're still working on getting access to them. Mabosif, same thing. Discount Intimidator. Magnezone is an interesting one. I think that I was really debating putting it between good and specific raids or only use if no better options, but I think it is only use if no better options. By the way, this isn't necessarily ordered for how viable they are. They're just all like in this category. The Magnezone's basically like it can Iron Defense Body Press, I believe. So let's actually check that out to make sure. Magnezone, Iron Defense, gets access to Body Press. Yep. So it gets Iron Defense, Body Press. It gets Flash Cannon. It gets Thunderbolt. That does give it some options, right? As well, too, you know, you can go for Thunder Wave with it. So you can use it for, like, some cute, you know, tools or options to kind of make it easier to deal with the opposing Pokemon. The typing is also very unique, so you're only really weak to ground, fire, and fighting. And then you can kind of wall, like, other stuff. It could be good into opposing water types. Could be good into opposing fairy types. So you can take advantage of that and utilize that. Oh, excuse me. But yeah, you can take advantage of that. Meowscarada. So Meowscarada is going into the only use if no better options. There's only one starter which you should realistically be using on a consistent basis because it's good. Mimikyu, only use if no better options. It's frail, but it does have Swords Dance, it does have Taunt, it does have Will-O-Wisp. It has some utility that you can take advantage of earlier. But you probably want to build up towards better mons that are going to be able to do a bit more of the job for you later on. Orthworm. Orthworm, again, is going to go into only use if no better options, but it could potentially squeeze itself into good and specific raids, mostly because it has a even though it's steel type, it is literally immune to ground, and it gets recovery if you click your ground move into it, which you can use to like cheese certain raids. So that's why it's like at the top. But the difference between like this and like, for example, Clodsire is Clodsire actually has like some decent coverage that you can use. Even though it's like stats aren't particularly phenomenal, it can actually do some damage, right? Which you can take advantage of. Mudsdale, another Pokemon that like really goes into that like only use this if you don't have better options. It like hits hard enough as a ground type. Palmet. So Palmet, oh, I don't know why this thing's being so weird with the dragging. Anyways, Palmet is a good in specific raids kind of Pokemon. Most of the time, I would say it's only used if no better options, but you do get a Nuzzler out of it. You can be annoying, right? And you can go for some cover. Actually, it's going to go down here, but know that Orthworm and Palmet are both Pokemon that, like, you could potentially maybe squeeze into the good in specific raids, right? But you do get Nuzzle out of it. You do get a strong attacker. Pelipper to me is like a... Oh. I messed up the wheel. Alright, sorry about that. Anyways, so Pelipper to me is like a Pokemon that goes into the good and specific raids. Being able to set rain can really mess like certain Pokemon up, right? You can use it to set certain conditions to kind of just optimize whatever composition you're using to just really beat a specific Pokemon. But besides that, it's not really doing too much. Quaquaval, it's just a strong like damage dealer with like the stats it was given, but it doesn't have much more going beyond that. Skeledirge, okay, so Skeledirge is different than the other starters and actually probably fits into the very viable category. Ghost Fire is actually a really, really good typing for a lot of Tera raids, and basically, like, what Skeledirge does is it takes advantage of, like, those, and it can go for Will-O-Wisp. It can spam, I believe it's I forgot the name of the thing, it's like something song. Torch Song, I think it's Torch Song. And you basically get a guaranteed boost to your special attack every time you click Torch Song. And what you can do is you can start by wisping and your teammates cheer like a defense on you. And then literally you just click Torch Song over and over and over again and they just can't break you and you just keep boosting your stats until you eventually terrestrialize and then you hit them for like a juicy, juicy hit. As well as Shadow Ball, so has some other coverage. And yeah, you can definitely take advantage of it. It has a sizable bulk as well. It's actually one of the more surprising ones for me, but like I've literally seen people like use their level 100 starters in a lot of raids. It's been actually pretty effective just because of the kit that this Pokemon has for raids. So Roaring Moon's an interesting one. I'd probably fit it down into the good and specific raids category. Originally, I would have probably rated it higher, but I just think it's super held back by its frailness. Again, it's really frail in the physical end, but if you bring it to the right rate, it could be really good. The only thing that you have to really keep in mind is just that, like, it is a glass cannon, or at least that was more so the intention when it was designed. So you have to be careful when you're bringing it and make sure you're bringing it to the right situations. All right, Rotom Fan is going to go into the only use if no better options. Same with Rotom Frost. Then Rotom Heat and Rotom Mow and Rotom Wash are all going to go into the good and specific raids. You can leverage these into specific Pokemon that you know are going to have trouble with these in certain raids, but for the most part, you're going to avoid using them on a consistent basis. Salamence is going to go into the only use if no better options. Now you guys might be like, wait, why is Salamence down there and Gyarados is up there? It's just a typing issue, and like also the like move pool access. Like Dragon Dance Mence isn't really helping the team as much as like Thunder Wave Gyarados does with like Intimidate, right? So there's just a little bit difference there. Glamora is an interesting one. I've seen it used in a bunch of raids, and it's done like enough damage where I've like at least considered it as being like usable, but not usable enough where I would put in like the good in specific raids, probably just in the only use if no better options, but it's like in the top tier of it, right? So like it can be used, it can do work if it needs to. Sandy Shocks is actually really cool. I think it's something that's really underrated in Tera raids. The ground electric type is actually a really unique typing that can snipe a lot of Tera raids that can give you trouble. Poison, water, although water you want to be cautious with, obviously, but most of the time they won't share the type, right? You know, the only thing it's really not good into is like Tera grass raids and like obviously some of the neutral ones, especially if it's a mon like Blissey. But for the most part, you can really take advantage of Sandy Shocks and its coverage to really just put on pressure. It also gets access to Thunder Wave, which you can use to paralyze opposing raid Pokemon, and Metal Sound, which you can use to lower special defense, and then obviously combine that with another special attack on your team or just attack next turn. Scizor is going to go into the only use if no better options. It is a good Swords answer in other formats, but in this specific case, we just want it as a small Swords answer to really just work for you until you can get a better set. I'm also going to put Hariyama at the top of this, and I'm going to put Mence, and I'm going to put Crocodile at the top. Intimidate's always like decent in Tera raids, and then Belly Drum Drain Punch over here, as you can see. So Slitherwing goes into the good in specific raids. I'd probably put it near the like top as well, because I think that it pairs really well with Koraidon. Koraidon in particular can really take advantage of this. I just noticed that actually Koraidon's not on this list, and Miraidon, which is actually really silly because like that's literally the whole point. I don't even know if I can like add it here. Oh, I got an idea. Okay, when we're done with the list, I'm gonna add them in manually, so don't worry about it. Slowbro Slowking, you can use them to wall. If you have the right setup, you can Calm Mind. You know, you can go for Thunder Waves. You can be annoying. Same with Staraptor, just like kind of an early like metagame, or not metagame, but like early Tera raid Pokemon. Sylveon can Calm Mind boost. It has Wish. It has Sustain, so that automatically gets it into the good and specific raids category. That being said, you do have to be like careful with it because it can be a little bit passive into the wrong raids. But it is a really good like Dragon Destroyer if like they don't have good coverage for you. Ting-Lu. So Ting-Lu is the only Ruination quartet that I think deserves to be in the very viable tier. And that's quite literally just because it gives like a little bit more options in terms of, you know, obviously reducing a damage from special attackers, right? So much like Gyarados is a really spammable Intimidator, Ting-Lu is pretty spammable in terms of like combining with like Koraidon teams, for example, right? Because Koraidon teams are mostly physical. So like Ting-Lu pairs perfectly with those. And then, you know, that's kind of how those work. Tinkaton. So Tinkaton actually is a little bit better in raids than it is in, like, I guess in other competitive stuff. The nice thing with Tinkaton is the Fairy Steel typing is actually really powerful. You do get access to Gigaton, Hammer, Swords Dance, Play Rough, and you also get access to, you know, some other coverage moves. The thing is like, Fake Out Knockoff don't really matter because, okay, you fake them out, like, what are you really doing? You're not doing much. But you do get access to a lot of cool tools there, right? And you can alternate between Gigaton Hammer and another Steel move, maybe. All right, so next up, Toedscruel. Again, only use if no better options. Same with Torkoal. These should really only be Pokemon used if you do not have better options. Serena, it goes into the don't use category. It's just not strong enough as is. Tyranitar, again, only use if no better options. Tyranitar is just kind of outclassed in general, and realistically, you want Pokemon that are doing individual damage. In certain situations, I'm going to put it up here. You could use it to change weather, which is really nice, but besides that, you know, it is very niche how you're going to be using it. Volcarona will go into the only use if like no better options category towards the top as well. Again, it can stack Fiery Dances, it can do some stuff, but some of the other Pokemon do that better. So now you guys are like, okay, so obviously I'm missing like, or obviously you're missing, you know, a couple of these options, right? Or a couple of these Pokemon. So the main ones that I'm actually missing here, which I wanted to look at, is going to be Miraidon. So Miraidon basically is pretty much a really strong like Pokemon, and it synergizes with a lot of different you know, options on like certain Tera Raid teams, and you could literally in some situations just stack a bunch of Miraidons and that's good enough to just win, right? And the thing is like when you have a Pokemon like that automatically obviously puts it in S. The reason why you see like Iron Hands up there as well is because it specifically pairs with Miraidon so well that you can literally just leverage it in front of it. Let me actually fix this. There you go. There you go. That looks better. Okay, so we have a Miraidon there. And, you know, Miraidon obviously is just, like, super, super strong in terms of what it can accomplish. It enables Iron Hands. It enables the Belly Drum set. And it also just, you know, enables, like, a lot of, like, teams to just not have to worry about sleep from opponents. And it does get access to Metal Sound, so you can use that next to another Miraidon to just, like, stack special defense drops and just spam it with the damage. And that's really where the double Miraidon comps come in the viability for these raids. So you can really take advantage of that, right? Then finally, the last Pokemon. Now, one thing worth noting is I do think that Koraidon is worse than Miraidon in certain situations, right? Same with Miraidon being worse than Koraidon in certain situations. Both of the legends are good. It's just more so electric spam is a little bit easier to pull off than like fighting spam sometimes. That being said, though, the photosynthesis bonds with Koraidon are powerful enough where you can really take advantage of it, right? So either way, you'll probably be fine. It's just that if you notice, like a lot of the top tier options are actually the Ironmon Pokemon, and then you'll see like some of the photosynthesis, right? So mainly, I would say that like I'm actually gonna probably lower Ments a little bit on this tier list because I actually think it's a little bit worse. Mainly, what I would say is that you kind of want to be very aware of when you're using them, and also making sure that you're supporting like your team properly. So you can stack 2 Koraidon, for example, because they get a boost to their attack by being in Sun, right? We have to make sure then that like the rest of the team is doing enough of a job where maybe they can cheer for you or like heal you. Healing is very important to Tera Raids, and I think that having a stall slot to be able to like heal and having one teammate dedicated to being the supportive option is really strong. That's why I think Pokemon like Ting-Lu, Pokemon like Gyarados, they're really strong, right? That's why I think that Pokemon like a Brute Bonnet can be really strong, right? And some of these Pokemon that can just wall the opposing Pokemon. It actively prevents the timer from running down, and while you're still getting damage, you're also not hurting your own team by losing a Pokemon, right? So it's like a perfect like team player Pokemon, basically. So that's pretty much it for the tier list. I think yeah, that's pretty much it. You might notice there's no Berserker on this tier list. The reason why there's no Berserker here is quite literally because I did not have a sprite of it on hand. If you guys don't know, that basically there's this Berserker strat where you bring 4 Berserker to a raid. 1 screeches, 1 goes for Helping Hand on the other Berserker, and then that one attacks. And then there's like, I believe there's one other move clicked. I forgot what it was. Because Helping Hand, Screech, something else. But anyways, yeah, it basically just destroys like most Pokemon. And I might talk about that combination in like a Tera comps video. Because obviously it's really strong. But that's kind of the main idea. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this tier list. Make sure to let me know what you thought about this. I know that we obviously talked through a lot of these Tera Raid Pokemon, but hopefully this guide was helpful for you and helps you guys prioritize which Pokemon you're really going to want. Again, like, just so you guys know, like, where I would say you'd probably want to start prioritizing things is going to be in this general area. Anything below that, you probably want to stray away from, right? And obviously Gyarados is one of the easier ones to get access to. A lot of these Pokemon are easier to get access to, but these are like really the strongest options possible. Once again, guys, as always, I incredibly appreciate the support. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Make sure to check out Patreon if you guys would like to support me beyond YouTube. I would incredibly appreciate that. Also, make sure to check out coaching if you guys would like to improve your game at competitive Pokemon. Without, going on any further, thank you guys so much for, watching the video, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.